Thank you guys for coming. Welcome to our office. My name is Harrison. I'm the co-founder CEO of Langchain. Really excited to be joined today by Jason from Cursor. We'll be doing a 20-ish minute fireside chat on just some interesting topics in agents and coding and everything there. And then we'll open it up for a bunch of questions as well. So if people have questions throughout, please save them to the end, but then we'll leave a bunch of time for those. And then there'll be more time at the end for, I'll definitely stick around. I think Jason might stick around for a few minutes and we have other folks here from Langchain as well. So there'll be more time at the end for more one-on-one chats. Thank you all for coming. I already introduced myself briefly. Jason, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself? And yeah, why don't you tell everyone what Cursor is? I don't think people know.
Yeah, so I work on an AI coding tool, but yeah, I've been at Cursor for 6 months. I'm the head of engineering for the product, but honestly spend most of my day coding and doing design work. And before Cursor, I was at Notion working on Notion Mail. I started a company a few years ago called Skiff that was acquired by Notion. And so have always been building and really working across productivity.
Awesome. So I think there's a bunch that I want to talk about. Maybe I'll start with some questions, and I'd be curious to hear your thought around like the evolution of coding agents and the interaction of them over the years, because you guys were one of the first on the scenes, and I think there's been a shift from kind of like tab complete to like chat in the IDE to now there's like all these terminal things, and now there's like async ones in the cloud as well. So I'd be curious to hear maybe from your perspective how you view just like the evolution of the UX of coding agents over time, and whether that's like a good summary or a bad summary, or how you guys think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a crazy evolution. It's basically been, a little over a year, all of those changes that we've seen. I think, as you mentioned, Cursor really got started with tab completion, which was really assisting you on like a per line basis across maybe one file. And then it seems like every, couple months, we have to keep raising the level of abstraction, which is a really challenging product problem to deal with. So the agent obviously allows you to kind of jump around a file and kind of trust it to make those changes on its own. I think we've seen in the past, 2 months or so, another shift where you're now trusting your agent from start to finish and really reviewing things in bulk across multiple files in a code base. And so we've had to really redesign a lot of our layout to be around, more like code review rather than just per line diffs. And I think as we're looking towards the next things that we're building, it actually becomes more about running multiple agents and being able to sort of validate quickly that those agents are running properly and being able to run them in parallel without being encumbered by all of the sort of choices and optionality that you might see today because you're dealing with just a single chat.
What's driving all these changes? Are the models just getting better and that's it? Or is there more things at play?
Yeah, I think the model's getting better is a big part of it. I think you're able to trust that the code is actually written properly. I think before you'd have to really audit it more thoroughly. There's also better tools for reviewing code. So we have BugBot, but there are a lot of code review tools that will automatically check for issues. I also think just culturally, people are getting more confident and kind of, getting addicted to how some of these tools work with the agents and I think it's easy to work in one mode. It actually is hard to switch between being fully agentic in your coding and then switching back. So we're starting to just see people, do that as a default.
So what are the different modes of using Cursor that you see people doing? And actually, yeah, what is your Cursor usage?
Right. I mean, within our own, company, there are so many different ways that engineers use it. I think there's even, a couple engineers on the team that don't use the agent in Cursor at all, like security or infra. And so, yeah, there are users that are very tab heavy and are majority tab. There are people that I see a lot, surprisingly, some of the best engineers on our team are just, we call them degents, but they are just fully using the agent for everything. And they're running multiple agents at once. My personal use case is I don't do any like crazy prompting. I don't have some like tips on like how to get the most out of the agent. I write really short, often with typos, prompts. I kick off multiple agents on the different things I'm working on or different pieces of a problem. And then wait for them to return. The mode I'm probably using the most is one that we just released today. It's called debug mode, which basically is a mode where the agent will help evaluate itself by writing logs, and then you will reproduce the steps, and then it'll check the logs to see if it worked or not. And that has been helpful because it's kind of just like helping you to throw compute at the problem until you finally like resolve some really tricky things that could be hard to do manually.
What does debug mode like mean? Why do I need a mode? Why doesn't it just do it automatically? Can't I prompt it to do that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. So it was actually like debug mode was a little, we had some internal debate on whether we wanted to do it. And the main reason was we're like, we have so many modes in Cursor. There's like plan, ask, super hard to discover. And we think these things are useful. Like the default should be that as a user, you just get the best mode that you need based off of what you're doing. The agent can kind of figure that out. I think the reason today it's a mode is it is a kind of different interaction pattern where like it does stop, the agent stops doing what it's doing to ask you questions and like feedback. So it could be annoying if you're not familiar with that. But I do think we want to get to a state where basically,
And sorry, what are those questions and feedback?
so it will, for example, here's like let's say I'm working on a front end app and the menu is opening the top left corner, super annoying bug to try to trace down. I'll say, hey, this needs to be anchored to the button ref. It will start going through and it'll start up a server. It'll start adding logs throughout the code base with a bunch of hypotheses. We'll say, this is one reason it could happen. This is like another. And then it'll say, hey, can you click the button, open the menu, and then tell me if it works or not? And you say, it doesn't work. It will then look at the logs and say, this hypothesis proven, this one disproven, this one disproven. And you kind of do that maybe 2 or 3 times usually. And then often it will just figure out the right thing.
How long do you think us humans will still be clicking? Like, can't you get an agent to click around and test that, or?
Month or two. The world's moving quickly.
So you talked about these different like modes for agents. I think you said plan, explain, debug. Like, what does that actually like practically mean? Is that just a different prompt that the agent's given? Is it that simple? Is there anything more than that?
Yeah, it's often just like changing a system level prompt. There are certain things where you have to update the actual UI. So like plan mode also now has questions, and so it will interrupt the user. And then the user can set settings sometimes on like how much they want to be interrupted and that sort of thing. So yeah, like ask mode is just like basically will not just have like a system prompt, but make sure not to call certain tools related to like editing files. So it's very, reliable.
Is there, going back to how different people use Cursor, is there a right way to use Cursor or to think about using coding agents in the future?
I don't think there's a right way. I think it depends on the type of engineer you are. I think it depends on the type of work you like to do. There's a whole world of running things asynchronously. There's another world of being really tightly in the loop and almost painting as you code or like visually editing things. I think the thing that I'm actually like, I see on Twitter all the time that I'm a little like wary of is when people are like, this is the best way to use it and have like tips. Often I think that's kind of made up. Like we don't use things, like we don't have these crazy long prompts. We're not doing like multi-stage planning. Often we're just iterating really quickly. And if something doesn't work, we kind of just like kill an agent and start over again. And usually that works best.
So Cursor started as an IDE. A big thing is now is all these terminal agents, and we've talked about some of the async things. Like, and this gets a little bit to the right way to use agents, but like, where do you think people will be interacting? If in a year you had to guess, like the percentage of time people are interacting with Cursor in an IDE versus in a terminal versus in some other form factor.
Yeah, I'm obviously gonna be biased on this one, but I don't think the terminal is what people have really been attracted to. I think there's definitely a new form of using. It's like, I think goes hand in hand with people trusting the agent more and kind of just wanting to see the changes at the end and deciding whether to keep it or not, letting things run for longer and run more intelligently. I think that's more of what's driven things. But the reason I think the IDE is super important is it really is purpose built across the entire software development cycle. So from planning an idea to being able to run the changes, look at the code, see the diffs in a really clear way, open a PR, view something in the browser, like all of that can be built into the modularity of the IDE, which, surprisingly, like has all of this built out over decades. I think if anything, the thing I'm seeing is that like the product layer is increasingly more important. The features that people are using most now in Cursor, like some of them are like plan mode, right? Where it's helpful to have sort of a WYSIWYG, editor and be able to like comment on things and have that interaction. And as soon as you like lose like buttons and modals and menus, it's just a lot harder to interact with. But whether everything has to happen on your laptop in the IDE, I think that will change.
Hmm.
I don't think things have to replace everything, but it depends on the context, and it'll be a wider array of use cases and also places where you'll be able to use something like Cursor.
And places where you'll be able to use something like Cursor. I think you guys have a website, I think, or a browser. Yeah, a website where you can interact with it. Is that kind of what you're thinking of, or internet?
Right. So yeah, we have a website. So the reason for that is you can access it from your phone. You can access it anywhere. Yeah, I think there's like a world in the not so far future where you could just be like on your AirPods using voice mode, which we have, and you're just going back and forth and coming up with ideas, and it's iterating on a plan. And by the time you get to the office and open up your laptop, you have a bunch of like, videos or whatever it is to review the changes, and you just say yes or no on those. And if something requires a little bit more fine like tuning, then you can pull it down and tweak it.
One of the things that I think Cursor is really, really good at is all the design and UX around how to interact with these agents. And previously you were at Notion, and I think they're also like very highly regarded for pre-Gen AI kind of like, although I think they've adapted really well with Gen AI. But how have you seen design and UX change with agents from, going from one company that, again, they've adapted well, but really strong in a pre-Gen AI? Is it similar now when you're working with agents? Or they're
Yeah, I think, well, I just say generally, I think a lot of the design for our product is not like AI specific, actually. I think if you understand the toolbox of components to use, UX patterns, like if there's only so many apps in the world and it's kind of traditional. So there's like an inbox, there's a dashboard, there's a chat interface. Like those are all kind of old school. And so I actually think a lot of what we do is about composing the right existing patterns and representing that properly in the product. And so the thing, and this is true with how Notion is built, but also true with how Cursor and the IDE is built, is that it's extremely modular. So, you might see this as a user using an IDE, like you can like have a completely different setup from the person sitting next to you, where you can customize the panels, drag and drop anything to anywhere. I think that's actually really critical for our adaptability because, like I mentioned, the product and expectations are changing with capabilities like every couple weeks even. And we had this big change, Cursor 2.0, a couple months ago. Didn't require like deleting the product and building a new one. It actually just was rearranging the puzzle pieces in a layout that prioritized, a sidebar, inbox style management, and then we just changed sort of the density of the chat interface.
Sounds like you're saying a lot of the components similar. Are there new components? Are there certain components that are changing in priority? Like, are there any differences, or is it really the same? Because I think all these components are, we're built for a world where there was humans interacting with the software and other humans interacting with the software, and now we've got agents as well. Is there anything different there, or should we really or not really?
Yeah, I think the building blocks, the latent variables behind it all haven't changed. It really is prioritizing what is controlling the interface. But within those constraints, there's actually like infinite permutations. And so one example of abstraction levels is like what, a year ago, you'd want to see every single tool call when you're running an agent and babysitting it. Now it's just like there's so much you wouldn't even be able to read it. And so we have to like tweak, how do we group things? How do we summarize it? And then it's like, okay, well, if you trust that the agent's doing things right, well, maybe it's more important to emphasize the actual file changes. And then that is more important to annotate. But then you could raise the abstraction level even higher. Like maybe I need the chat to not be a single agent that I'm chatting with, but chatting across multiple agents. And so then that's like a different invisible UI where it's like has to understand which subagent I'm referring to and like how to orchestrate the changes. You can keep going up and up over time.
What's the highest level of abstraction that you think is like? I know it's impossible to predict the future, but if you had to take a guess at the highest level of abstraction that you could see being a realistic version.
I think you see all the buttons and choices that we have today, choosing a model, choosing a mode, choosing where it runs, disappear. And I think it is basically like talking to a person. And I don't think that means like anyone could code. I think it actually still caters to professional engineers in that world because you have to have the vocabulary and knowledge of what you're trying to change to be able to sort of do that still. So if you're on the product side, it's like knowing exactly the workflow you want and what functionality you want to support. But maybe you're more on the infra side of things. It's like knowing the code base well enough to know what sort of architecture and system design is the best for this type of thing you're building. So yeah, I think that would be the most extreme. And I also want to mention, like, I think as we've raised the abstraction layer, we don't get rid of things. So you always have the ability to kind of like zoom and like right click and dig deeper if you want to, but the defaults are definitely changing.
One of the things you mentioned previously, I think, was like where the human's in the loop, whether it's like looking at diffs or and that's code review in a bunch of sense. How do you think code review changes with AI?
Yeah, I think one is, and this is, hard to say, we don't, at least on the product team, we're not doing like human review that much at Cursor. It's the majority of it is basically, we have our bug bot basically finds issues, and we'll just start automatically fixing them and then looping on CI. And that works really well, but it also helps you, have confidence in the types of things that it's finding. The other is semantic grouping of information. So like being able to look at a diff and understand what changes the agent made. So maybe you could see the original prompt, but like even better, it'd just be like comments from the agent, the same way a human would maybe annotate a really big PR of like, this is why I did this is why I did that. So I think that isn't a huge change, but I think, would make a reasonable difference.
Um, Out of curiosity, engineers at Cursor use Cursor to write the code, use Bugbot to review the code.
Yeah.
When do they interact with other engineers?
Oh my God. So the thing that I think is most apparent if you were like join Cursor as an engineer is people really dog food the product like crazy. To the point where I remember like my first week, I like changed the key binding. It was like Option Alt Shift Command J when you're open. Like it was something I thought was so obscure. This was the perfect key binding to use for something no one's going to notice. Within like half a second, there were like 3 engineers that were commenting in Slack. You completely broken my workflow. What is going on? And I think almost inevitably with any change that you make, you will get strong feedback very quickly, and which I think is great. I think it's more so on that level that people are constantly giving and getting feedback and iterating really quickly on product changes.
Is there anything you've done from like an organizational perspective to like encourage that or harness that as well? Because I can imagine if you just have all that coming in, it's like a constant deluge sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, so before I started the company, and we're in email. Engineers use email, but not that much. And so yeah, the experience was like, please, like this is like they would be like, I use it for like spam emails and like buying things, not like talking on a long thread. The thing that's nice about working in this space is there's no need to do that. Like basically we are all working around the clock because we're, in a very competitive space. We're really excited to build things. And so people are just naturally using it all the time. The other thing I would say, and this is like how I think about like product changes, is the question we ask is like, what could I build that would make my daily life better? Like what would help me tomorrow get more done, not have to like deal with an annoying error or issue? And that guides so much of what we do, because you get to benefit immediately. Like you fixed some annoying bug. It's no longer going to bother you every single day you come into work.
How much of your roadmap would you say is shaped by that? Like what would make my life better versus incoming requests? And has that changed over time?
I think it's changing as the company is getting larger. We do have roadmaps for, let's say a month and goals for that. But honestly, like some of our biggest features are really built bottoms up. So the agent in Cursor, the key feature that people think of when they think of Cursor, was built by one person on the team, Ian, who everyone was skeptical of it, and he prototyped it super quickly, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, this works." That is also true of debug mode, which I just mentioned. I worked on a feature, Thanksgiving for something I really wanted. I was bored up Thanksgiving. We're launching that, and is purely again like it just helped people on the team, and we see if there's internal adoption. That's kind of our metric for this is ready to ship.
You guys do an incredible job of shipping like really fast. How do you keep that speed?
I honestly think a lot of we don't have a lot of process. So, we have a couple meeting rooms. There's like, we have maybe 1 or 2 PMs, but genuinely, it's not, our arguments are not often in documents or alignment meetings. Arguments are in code. And it all kind of is possible because we have a really, really high bar for talent on the team. So I think Cursor at the beginning of the year was probably like in the ballpark of like 20 people total. That was because the process to hiring people was very slow and the bar was extremely, extremely high, painfully high, where it's like, wow, this person is smart, but would they be the best person on the team, basically? And because of that, you're really able to delegate to anyone at the company something, and everyone is super high agency where they will come up with the idea, think about the UX, go on Twitter and respond to all the support issues, speak to customers at all the different enterprises and get it out. I think that just comes down to people.
How do you guys think about your roadmap? You mentioned a month. Is that the typical kind of like planning now? Is there longer than that? And then also, how do you think about like, I feel like there's these waves of like stuff changes so fast.
Yeah.
How much do you think about trying to like catch up to the existing one versus like, can we leapfrog ahead? Can we skate to where the pucks go?
I would say a good amount is what's the future? What's going to be possible in 3 months? Let's just take a bet on it. So a good amount of the team is doing that. So even though we have these 1 month roadmaps are more for like core product features, like what are people asking for? What do we think are, things that improve like the daily experience versus like, this is going to take 2 months to rewrite how this thing works. And it's going to be a bigger investment. I would say also like, we are reactive, extremely so. So sometimes we'll get a new model a little bit before it's released and, test it out and be like, wow, this is really good at X, Y, and Z. And oftentimes, people will jump to work on that over the weekend because they want to get it out before the release. And, big features could actually be, built in a couple days.
Speaking of models, you guys released your own model, Composer. What led to that? Why did you do it? How have you seen people use it or change their cursor patterns because of that?
Yeah, I think we've seen that there needs to be models that are specifically built for the type of coding that we're seeing engineers do at, using our product. And so Composer, I think, carves out a very specific, Composer 1, it was a specific use case where it's extremely fast and good quality, and intelligent. And it's really for this use case I was describing before, where it's like you want to be in the loop. So I use it very often because I'm doing front-end development, where it's like I am making changes and I want the agent to respond in a couple seconds because I want to make tons of micro interaction decisions and things. And so it really is really good at like being like a partner, like to bounce back ideas and things and like results really quickly versus something, that might be more longer term and sort of async use cases.
You mentioned, I think the 2.2 release today. That was debug mode. What else was in it? What else is launched recently that we should know of?
Yeah, so we have debug mode out. We have, some improvements to plans. So plans will ask you questions and you can answer. That's more interactive. As long as people promise not to tweet or at least be vague about it. We have another thing coming out tomorrow morning. I worked a bunch on this, which is a visual editor for Cursor's browser. So think about like a design tool where you have a sidebar where you can inspect elements and like tweak gradients and padding and all these things. You will be able to do that directly in Cursor and select elements and prompt as you like click on things. I found that to be very powerful.
And that works with like any front end
Yes, you go to, it needs to connect to your code base to make the changes, but if you go to any website on the internet, you'll see like the color tokens and design system they're using. The user React, you'll see the props and the different state that they're using. I think it's really cool because, it's one source of truth basically where the code and design are now happening in the same place. And there's not some translation of this is like design language or design definition of it. You're tweaking the actual components.
If we think about kind of like agent engineering and people doing agent engineering at Cursor, would you say everyone does agent engineering? Is there a team that focuses on that?
Yeah, so we do have a team, that focuses on like agent quality, and so they think about tools and the harness and how we evaluate things. But it's very porous. Like I mentioned, we don't have like immense amounts of like rigidity about like people working on certain things. And so, yeah, engineer on the core product team was working on plan mode, needs to make tweaks to have this new mode, and so there's back and forth. And so, oftentimes we're honestly like dog fooding, those changes as well, and like evaluating just by having people kind of share vibes on what changes people are making.
For the people, whether they're on the like agent engineering team or on other devs that like really spike at this type of like this new discipline, what makes them spike? Why are there common is there anything special about their background or characteristics?
No, I mean, I think oftentimes they are traditionally like more on the product side of things than necessarily like ML or research. We've had people go back and forth between those teams pretty frequently, because I think it requires a lot of intuition for like how you want things to work in the end experience, and being able to interpret like all the feedback you're getting from the rest of the team.
And maybe last question from me. I think you guys did a blog last week with OpenAI on like optimizing one of the agent harnesses in Cursor for they had some new model or at least or something. Okay, yeah, that's a lot. I mean, how do you think like one of the things that I've seen on Twitter a bunch is this idea of like an agent harness. How do you think about the scaffold? How do you think about the scaffolding around the model? Does it need to be particular to the model? Is it particular to Composer versus like Codex? How different?
I'm less involved in this side of things, but I think generally what we aim for is to have something that's really flexible, because we're constantly like trying new things and trying different modes. And so the important thing is basically to be able to, adapt it and make it be able to change as capabilities change.
Makes a bunch of sense. Everything's changing quickly.
Yeah.
All right. Questions? Maybe right there. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned about like adding a new feature called like visual browser. So I think that's something they have seen similarly in some other tools like Lovable. Are we going to more like the vibe coding space, make trying to compete with them?
I do not think it's for vibe coding. My personal, like I mentioned, I built it basically for myself as someone who's like an engineer working on product. I think it's actually it's very much for, I think, professional engineers or professional designers, where it's frustrating if you're building an app and it turns into the purple and yellow gradients that everyone's familiar with. Like you want to like dig deep and be like, I want the padding to be exactly this and the pixels to be exactly this. It gives you a larger vocabulary to sort of specify those changes, a visual vocabulary that's often more accurate than trying to just write it via text. It also, I think, is really cool because even if you don't want to use the sidebar, you can just click on elements and like prompt as you go. And so you can like kick off like 6 agents in like a matter of seconds. And if you have hot reloading, like all of a sudden your website starts changing like as you go. So it's also fun as like a very specific tool.
A super quick question. I love your browser agent. I use it all the time. One thing I will hope you could do is because I want to keep iterating on my design and it kind of stops and it wants to PR my Git right away. Is there like a future that you can just keep going and going and going on?
Yeah, I think the future totally is basically the agent being able to evaluate things, loop for longer, run for longer as needed. That's why I like debug mode. It's like debug mode today requires me as a human to like click the button so it can confirm the logs. But that is very, I think a short-lived thing. The ideal experience for so much is for the agent to basically loop on its ability to evaluate things until it gets it right.
Yeah. I don't know if you're working on the AI agent side too much, maybe, or not as much. I hear you're wary of it, but I noticed in Cursor, thinking as they have like memory management, you can like it kind of decide what preferences, policies, procedures specific to the engineer or the department or the organization, etc. Information and context is super important to AI agents. What are you guys looking at building that out or like scaling that more, or kind of what's your idea about how you grapple with that kind of super important, like long context horizon?
Yeah,
it goes.
We're experimenting a lot. I mean, there's so many different things that have emerged. There's like rules, we have memories, you see skills and other things. I think figuring out summarization and a way to summarize really well is what we're kind of experimenting on. I also think just like the models inherently, like with our own model, like its ability to properly figure out like what are the most important, tokens that keep coming up, for example, as you use it. And then, yes, sharing across an organization. I think it's important to dabble into because sometimes, things can also go stale where like, again, as the models change, like a rule that you added for your organization might change over time, making sure it's easy for people to not get like trapped by forgetting to get rid of something or someone adding something that might not be helpful.
For the Composer that you guys released, I've met other individuals that have released where they built out their medical fine-tune model because it's specialized in medical questions on top of Gemini. They found that it wasn't as effective as one-shot prompting, just the overall Gemini model.
because they felt, well, mostly because you have to maintain it over a course of time as well to make sure it keeps up with the new releases of Gemini and all the new models coming out. You guys, how are you guys strategizing and preparing for something like that to make sure it essentially doesn't be stale?
You mean Composer? Yeah. So, things are constantly basically improving with the model. It's not, as I say, static. I think particularly like our focus was more so about figuring out like a balance of speed and intelligence that kind of was in the pocket of how people would, benefit as users of Cursor for a large class of problems that people were using. But yeah, so a little bit less on like the context side going so.
Hey, I'm Joe. Throughout like this, you sort of focused on Cursor's applicability to like traditional engineering workflows. I'm a product manager. I use Cursor for prototyping. I have a designer on my team who's been using it instead of Figma. And I'm just curious if you guys have a perspective, like how many people who use Cursor had never installed an IDE for using Cursor? And is that like a persona that you're catering more to? I think like these coding agents have turned out to be really good. That's the place where work can get done. But curious how you think about that.
I'll be honest with you. The truth is that we don't focus on, like, I think the floor for like access to this stuff has gotten lower and it's been more accessible. And like, I think the browser tool that we're adding will help designers. But truthfully, our focus is often on raising the ceiling. So we are actually like the main objective that we're optimizing for is like, who's the best engineer in the world? How can we make them more capable? And it just so happens that as you do that, you build out tools that I think more people can benefit from. But in terms of our focus, I think there's a lot we can do to improve the onboarding experience and setup, especially around like, I think, designers and PMs often get frustrated getting Git, like GitHub and all of that set up. So I think there's a lot we can do to make that easier. So hopefully get more people into Cursor.
Thank you. I'm Drew. I've been experimenting using Cursor for verification agencies and driver logic testing of smart contracts. For like a deeper QA and security hardening, do you have any like lesser known workflows that you would try, or maybe this debug tool has some interesting ideas, but just like curious if there's anything for a part of QA testing?
Yeah, I think honestly we're trying to build out into the actual agents the ability for them to do testing. So that's not released as much, but I think the best for QA, like a person doing QA, is the speedbuck mode tool, which I recommend people to try out. Like I know we just released it, but genuinely I think it's really, really helpful because it is so deterministic almost in its ability to kind of trace down a issue.
Yeah, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for like Cursor in the next like 12 to 18 months? And then many people with voice agent that we talking about like out expert.
I don't think it's actually necessarily voice agents. I think the main thing that people maybe want is we want the agents to be more intelligent. We want them to run for longer. We want them to do more. And, I think a lot of agents today are basically like sight reading the code. They're not able to really know if the changes work or not. I think there's so much more opportunity, so much more compute to be used, having the agents do so many things that humans are doing to sort of check and verify them. So I feel like there's a lot more to go in the next, not even 18, 12 months, next 3 to 6 months. So it'll be exciting to see as all the products evolve.
That's all I've got though. Thank you guys so much for coming and hopefully see you at the next one of these.